Well, good afternoon, everyone on Automation Hour. We are so thrilled that you could join us today. We are excited to bring you a wonderful presentation from our returning presenter, Anthony Foster. So, Anthony, have I given you rights to share your screen?
It looks like you may have not, because I can't seem to find that option. And then maybe because I'm not a regular user. Here we go.
Phenomenal.
No, yo apoyo el proyecto.
Screen 2. Share my screen.
Success. We win in the battle with technology.
Huzzah!
All right, so as usual, we'll go through a few housekeeping slides first. So as you have joined, we will have all lines muted. You are welcome to post your questions either here in the questions widget or also on the Automation Hour Trailblazer community group. We are recording the session and we will make sure that gets posted after we wrap today as well. As always, we invite you to interact with us either on the Trailblazer community, our website, or our new Twitter handle. We also have a YouTube channel where all of these videos are posted, and as of last week, we also now have a LinkedIn page. So if you would like to interact with us there, we are definitely starting to build our following on that platform as well. Okay, so we would love for you to join our upcoming sessions. We have a jam-packed first half of the year. All of these are in the deck and are links to the registration from automationhour.com as well. So we hope to see you again at a future Automation Hour session. So we'll go, thank you to our sponsors next. Without these sponsors, we could not bring this to you every other week at no cost. So we want to say a huge thank you to ActiveCampaign, who definitely supports us and allows us to send out those awesome emails that you get alerting you to our webinars. And then our other sponsor that has been with us since the very beginning is Concrete.io. And we would love to give them a huge shout out for sponsoring us as well. So thank you to them. All right, so with that, we always like to give a nod to our co-founders, some of whom have moved on. So David, Jen, Rakesh, so thrilled that you started this. And of course, also thrilled that we are able to continue this with our current cast of co-presenters, myself, Michelle Hansen, and the amazing Rakesh Gupta. So with that, Anthony, I believe I am going to pass this over to you to get started with today's presentation.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Michelle and Rakesh. All right. So welcome, everyone. Thanks very much for joining. My name is Anthony Foster. I am a technical account manager at Salesforce. I'm here today as a private citizen. So just keep in mind that all content and my opinions are my own. I'm very happy to say this is my second time presenting at Automation Hour. I know what you're thinking, like the sequel's sometimes not as good as the original, but I'm going to try and make this presentation as entertaining and informative as I possibly can. So let's jump into today's topic. We're going to talk about knowledge management. So how to use Flow to improve your Salesforce knowledge articles. We'll jump into our agenda here. We'll talk about a business problem that we're trying to solve. We'll get into the fun stuff, actually walk through how the functionality works both internally and for our external experience users. Talk about some enhancement ideas and things that I've kind of been thinking about on the roadmap, do a little recap, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So let's talk about our business problem here. So let's meet Jane. Jane is our system administrator in Up and Under Brewing, a small microbrewery located here in San Francisco, where I am based. And the support team, they're using Salesforce Knowledge to provide self-service and deliver consistent support to their customers and their suppliers. Now, they're running into a little problem because the subject matter experts and the support team want to understand if a knowledge article is helpful in the content that's contained there and why it's helpful. And so they can improve their customer satisfaction and increase their case deflection. They're a small team, they need to be able to scale, and so providing that information in self-serve is really important to them. And so they want to now start to improve the quality of those articles. So let's start and kind of ground ourselves in our knowledge article setup. So this demo will be using Lightning knowledge. So you may have to activate that. We're going to use it in a developer instance. And so we won't go through setting that up. We've already got that set up for our demonstration purposes, but I wanted to highlight that we're actually using Lightning knowledge for this setup. All right. So a few basic concepts to get grounded in. The first is that a knowledge article has a versions. So when you create an article, it'll have a number of versions associated. You can make changes and push those in to new versions. But keep in mind, you can only have one version active at a time. We've also got a feedback component, a simple thumbs up and thumbs down. And thanks to a large social network that has become synonymous with thumbs up, it's a really great way to quickly capture feedback when you're on a screen and interacting with users. And there's a few nuances to that standard component that's available out of the box. But first of all, users can change their votes. So feedback can't be assigned to draft articles, which may or may not be important depending on your use case. If you want to get feedback, say, from a proofing team before an article gets published. And the other piece is also important. The votes are assigned to an article, not a specific version. Okay, so think of an article as a container, a folder, and then you have files within that folder, which are considered your article versions. And then ratings are assigned as either 1, which is considered negative, and 5, which is considered positive. So if you've ever used the classic knowledge, you'll know that you used to see the star rating, and you could have up to 5 stars. Now with Lightning knowledge, you either have thumbs up or thumbs down. And so this is a great way to kind of get some initial feedback and kind of get a basic scoring in terms of how useful your knowledge article components are. But keep in mind, you're just getting that. So when you go to report and take a look at a report in terms of your feedback, this is kind of what you end up with. You've got a whole bunch of thumbs up or thumbs down, but no real context as to why someone provided either positive or negative feedback. So my question here is, why did Mrs. Lewis provide negative feedback? All right, so that's what we're going to try and solve here today. So it looks like we need a new solution in order to solve this puzzle. Before we dive into our solution, we want to take a look at some of our success criteria and what we actually want to achieve. So context. So first of all, we want to get additional information if negative feedback is provided. Data integrity. We want to prevent duplicate voting. Okay, so we want to make sure that users can't change their votes. It keeps the integrity of their feedback and their submission in place. And this is more a business rule than it is a system limitation. So visibility, we want to make sure that we're prompting for information at the right time. And we'll go into that when we go into how the functionality works. And then finally, reporting element. So we want to still enable standard article feedback reporting. And so we've got this standard component, but that we're going to use through our flow, spoiler alert, but we want to have the ability so that if users don't use it, or we only use our new flow for certain users, then we can still fill in with our standard functionality. So we can still do our standard reporting. If we decide not to use it, or it doesn't work out, or it changes, then there's no need for data migration over to a new setup, or if we stop using it entirely, we can continue on as if nothing had happened. So that's really our 4 key success criteria we want to judge our setup by when we create it. I know there's always the desire to go straight into things and start building, but I can tell you now that taking the time to take a step back, utilize pen and paper, whether it be a system, whether it be a whiteboard, something that can help you to kind of just map out what your process should do and what your business process looks like. Can be very, very helpful. Now, I've used a mapping tool here. If anyone's wondering, it's elements.cloud. They don't pay me to say that. I just like to use their tool. And I like it because it's very simple. It explains in very simple ways what things happen and how they work and what things are involved in your system. The other benefit is that my documentation is now taken care of. So now I can share this documentation. You don't have to be a Flow user. I've now got my documentation already and set up here and good to go. So let's quickly walk through it here from the left. We want the opportunity to provide feedback. First thing we do is we check a vote. So we can't have multiple vote attempts. All right, and so if you've already submitted feedback, we want to say, hey, you've already voted and here is your feedback you've provided. But if they haven't, then let's give them an interface to enter their feedback. If it's positive feedback, they can go ahead and submit. If it's negative, we want to capture a reason. So we want to make sure we're getting some context for their negative vote. Again, we go ahead and submit that feedback. Everything gets processed. We then kick off and say, hey, let's go insert our vote. So that's addressing the standard reporting functionality. A vote is a standard object in Salesforce. It's what happens when you click one of those thumbs up or thumbs down icons on the standard component. If it fails though, we want to be able to roll back a transaction. So we want to make sure that a vote is not counted without being able to complete the feedback record. The same thing happens in the next step. So we want to save our feedback, right? So there's no point in kind of asking the user for it, but then not capturing it in a way that we can process. So we save that feedback, and again, we want to roll back our transaction because we want to make sure that everything stays intact. So a vote belongs with the feedback. If either of them fail, we want to roll back as if nothing had ever happened. We take our happy path. Let's say we got to the end, our feedback is saved, and now we can initiate that feedback management process. That's kind of an extension of this piece. So this is really our overall flow. Again, I would strongly encourage you to start this way. You can use whatever tool is your preference. And I find that using this or drawing on a whiteboard is still way quicker than trying to mock up a flow when you're doing kind of prototyping and seeing how things work. We have a few prerequisites. So I mentioned about lightning knowledge, so getting that set up before you get started here. The next piece is you want to install some base components from Unofficial SF. So like the Beatles, you get by with a little help from your friends. And if we jump over to here, for those who have not checked out Unofficial SF, you can go to unofficialsf.com. It is a free resource and a collection of community collaborators who are passionate about automation, not just Flow, but all of the other automation tools available for Salesforce. If you click on Flow here, it'll give you some resources that you can leverage in terms of getting started, screen components, actions, and it's one of those screen components we're actually going to leverage today to improve our user interface. And it is called Quick Choice. So here is the reference here. When we go into the demo, we'll see how that works. But again, this is a great resource, one for kind of improving that user interface, and two, inspiring you, thinking of other use cases. How could you leverage it in different solutions? And it allows you to kind of get up started quickly. So if you haven't checked that out, I'd strongly encourage you to do so. And finally, we're going to add a custom object to capture that feedback that we get from a user. So we want to do that. We want to have a way that we can record that feedback, that we can take action on it, we can start to report on it, we can provide insight into what are the types of feedback that we're getting and how do we go ahead and process it. Right, we've reached the fun part of this the presentation where we go and take a look at a demo. Before I do, are there any questions that have come in yet?
As far as I can tell, we do not have any questions that have come in yet, so I think we are good to go for demo.
All right, good deal. All right, what do we go ahead and switch over here? All right. So here I am in a developer org, and I've set up my Lightning knowledge here. I've got my custom app for automation hour that I've selected, and I have some draft articles that I've already seeded. So as you can see, there's some questions that we do expect people coming to our website that we want to be able to provide so they don't have to contact support. So this is our internal view here, and let's jump into our actual article title. So here's our knowledge article. What are you doing to be a sustainable business? And so we've got our knowledge article set up here on the left, but on the right, we've got a couple of components here. Now, the first component up here is, was this article helpful? That's actually the standard component. And I left that there just for comparison. So you'll notice that this article is in draft and we can't provide any feedback. Not particularly useful. But we could have users who are part of a QA team who want to go ahead and review. And so we want a way that they can actually provide feedback before something is even published, because there may be changes required before they can go ahead and make it available to the groups that they need to. All right. So here is our component that we've created. Now, this is a screen flow. It's running on our knowledge article, and we're utilizing a component, that quick choice component that we got from Unofficial SF. And I really like this component, one, because I think it is a great visually rich and engaging user interface. And two, it's very extensible. And so you can customize it as you need to, and we'll go through that as we go through the flow setup. All right. So one of our requirements was to make sure that we were asked the right questions at the right time. So we only want to know if there's negative feedback. We want to capture a reason. For yes, we're not going to capture a reason, at least for now. Okay, but just to show you kind of the demo and how it works and the functionality to help maybe seed some ideas. Let's first of all take a look and select yes. So you notice when I click on or tap on, if I'm on a mobile device, then it's going to select it, highlight in blue, and then I can submit feedback. So you notice that instead of finish, my flow actually says submit feedback. So I'm leveraging that custom labeling that you can now do for your flow navigation labels. But we actually want to provide some negative feedback on this one. We're actually going to say, no, this article was not helpful. And when we do that, you'll notice now we're prompted for a feedback reason. So now we're getting things in context. All right. Now I've chosen a pick list here, and I'm utilizing the new Spring 22 availability. This is actually coming off a field. So instead of having to recreate my list of values, say from a pick list or a radio button, and then kind of feeding in those record choices and those available values, I'm actually using the field component directly now that pick lists are supported for Spring 22. The benefit of doing that is that if I make a change to my values for my feedback reason field, it's going to automatically update my flow, so I don't have to keep updating versions every time we decide to add or remove a feedback reason. All right. Now this interface, obviously, the more values and feedback reasons that you have, is more kind of pick lists become more friendly. But if you only have a few values, you may want to use a radio button just to kind of make it easy for the user to see what options are available. So let's go ahead and we'll choose a reason, and then we'll go ahead and submit it. And we get this nice little message that says, yep, thanks very much, your feedback was submitted. Thank you very much for your feedback. a couple of things to note here. One is that we confirm that everything went through okay. The second thing to note is that this article has not been updated. So this is the standard component. Let's go ahead and refresh. Well, let me try to right click. There we go. Let's reload our page here. And so you'll see now our component with our flow has updated and it's told us, yep, you've already provided feedback for this article. And here is the vote that you provided. All right, so a couple of things to note here. Our standard component is still not updating. And the reason for that is because we haven't published this article. So let's also add a category here. Let's click edit, FAQ, we'll hit save. All right, data category is updated. Let's go ahead now. We can publish this article. And now you'll notice that our thumbs down component now is updated for us. So even though we're using a custom interface that we would replace, and in production, we would obviously remove that standard component, we're still fitting in with the standard capability. So if we want to run standard reports on votes and article feedback, we can still get those standard reports available. So if someone's already set up a whole bunch of reports, we're not going to break anything by implementing this new user interface. All right, so some other things have happened in the background as well. Let's jump over into our related section here. And you notice now that I've created this custom record. I've got knowledge, article, feedback. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's happening over here. So this is a very simple record set up, and of course you could expand this out into having a status and then having a kind of a life cycle in terms of a feedback record and how you want to process that. This really is just kind of for demonstration purposes to say that yes, we're capturing the knowledge article. We're also capturing the version the feedback is created for, which gives us additional context, because with the thumbs, you don't understand which version is actually associated. So for example, if someone made a downvote in the first version, but then that feedback was addressed and now the article is being updated and improved, then that rating is not going to reflect the current version. So this gives you valuable context for that feedback. It also allows you to do some reporting to kind of analyze and say, hey, what kind of feedback are we getting? And of course, we selected didn't answer my question. And so you can see from our report, we've got 1 vote now for that article. Being a developer account, I only have 1 other user, so I'm not going to get a lot of volume here, but you can see if you have larger organizations or you are interacting with a lot of articles and encouraging feedback from your teams, this can be a great way to get that feedback, that context, and then apply that to improve the quality of your knowledge base. All right. So here is.
Before you jump too far ahead, we've got a question that came in from Pavel.
Yeah.
So when there's a new version of the article, can the user send their feedback again? And how will the overall article rating be calculated, per article or per version?
The votes are associated to an article. Each vote has the 1 or the 5. This feedback mechanism associates to a specific version. So knowledge article is actually the specific version. So you'll notice that this is version 1. And why don't we go ahead and try it? Let's see what happens. So let's go back to what are you doing to be a sustainable business? All right, let's edit as draft. All right, friendly reminder. And of course, it's going to prompt us to update our. Let's say we also now recycle our used cans. All right, so let's go ahead and hit save. So we don't have to make an update there, but let's go ahead and do that. So that was saved. We've now, looks like we're ready to activate. So why don't we go ahead and try to publish? All right, and we'll put the flag as a new version so that we'll actually create a new version for this. So let's go ahead and publish. All right, so let's refresh our screen. So you notice our version numbers increased to version 2. All right, so we have our record here. It's going to maintain, because it's picking up off the actual article, not off the article version. And if you look at our related records here, we don't have any feedback for this specific version. Now, this is by design, as I mentioned in the introduction. This is more by business requirement than it is by technical limitation. But those votes that do get calculated, they are assigned up to the article, not a specific version. And so you could find ways that you may want to split those out, right? You say, hey, let's let the user vote, but then they can continue to provide feedback on different versions, even if they've already voted either thumbs up or thumbs down. I think it really depends on your business use case and then what functionality you're looking to implement. Paul, did that answer your question?
I'll keep you posted if we get a response.
All right, good deal. Any other questions before we move on and go take a look under the hood?
No, we're good. And Pavel came back and said, yes, that does answer it.
Ah, brilliant. Yeah, knowledge and knowledge articles are kind of a bit of a strange setup. I understand why they do it at the article level, but it somewhat doesn't make sense. Kind of, from a practical perspective to get that context. One thing I will note is that lookup actually is just a lookup. It is not a master detail. The reason for that is because of record ownership. So we want to be able to have that article feedback be able to be submitted and then assigned to a queue and then picked up by other users. So we need to have that separation. It does mean that if we delete a knowledge article, there may be some data cleanup, but that outweighs, that downside is outweighed by the flexibility we've got for utilizing for our knowledge article feedback record and process. Why don't we go ahead and we'll jump into setup and we'll go ahead and take a look at the flow that is powering this functionality. And I apologize for my 2 hamsters running my internet connection. Let's go to quick find. Let's jump into flow and flows. All right, so we have our knowledge feedback screen flow here, and we'll walk through and show you how this works. All right, let's see if we can get this subway map to display nicely. All right, heads up, I am a fan of the freeform. I am still exploring moving over to auto layout. I know that those who use it absolutely love it. I'm still getting familiar, so I'm most comfortable in freeform, but of course you could always switch the layout to be auto layout if you so desire. All right, so let's take a look at what we have going on here. We have a screen flow and we are going to start, and then we kick it off. We start and assign some variables. So we did two things here. One, we wanted to set a current record ID. And current record is a global variable for flow. So we want to be able to set that record and make sure we know which record is currently being run. And then we also set the current stage. Now, if you were doing something that had kind of a long kind of wizard style where you had multiple screens and different things, you may want to actually present those stages to your users. But in our case, we're going to use it for debugging because we've got a subflow that we have set up, and I'm going to show you how that current stage comes into play. So once we go ahead and set our variables, then we go ahead and we get our knowledge article version. So this is a standard get record. We're utilizing a special variable called record ID, and it does require you to have it in a specific case. So lowercase record, capitalized I, and then lowercase d. Now in this instance, I've used it as a text variable. You could of course use that as a record variable to automatically pass in the ID of the record into that variable so you can run your flow. I've done it this way mostly out of habit, but that is an area for me to explore and kind of change up and kind of improve that record performance so I don't have to worry about a get records when the page loads. And then here we're only taking the first record, so we only want a single match because that's all we expect. And then we want to automatically store all of the fields that we need to be able to access in order to process our flow. The next thing we go to do, and we want to check to see, hey, do we actually find an article version? And so this is going to help us avoid that ugly red error text. And particularly if you're an end user, all you see is a cryptic message that says, I can't do what I need to. Someone needs to fix this. Well, these things will help you to prevent that from happening. You'll notice we also have our fault connector connecting to our error subflow, and I'll touch on that in just a little bit. So let's make sure that we find an article version. The other thing I like to do, if you look at this decision, I use very similar terminology. So I always use something check. And I like doing that because it forces you, just like we did in our mapping, to show a reason why something continues or something stops. I think it can be very misleading and particularly hard to manage if you have a bunch of true, false, yes, no kind of decisions. And so you are looking maybe at your elements and say, okay, I've got yes _1, yes _2, yes _3, yes _4. What does that relate to? Where am I in the process or of my flow running? And so I find this is a much better way to help you really understand, also from people just kind of looking at it and say, oh, I know because we found a record so we can continue on. And so those names reflect that, and I find that a much better way to kind of guide a user down the path of the logic. All right, so we are taking our record variable and we just want to make sure that we actually get that populated. So we check if it's null, if it's false. And that means if it's not false, it found an article, I know that's a double negative, but stay with me, then we actually want to display a screen and say, hey, you've already voted. We can't have you vote again because we're going to error out because it's going to try to create a new record. And then we're going to get a nasty platform error that says you can't do that. So we go ahead and make our decision, and then we base that off to what to do next. So then we go ahead and get our vote record. Because if the person, if we did find an article, then we need to make sure, well, has this person already voted? So again, we're using our get record here, and we're looking for a vote that's created by the running user. So we're using the global variable here. So user ID you can access directly from those global variables, so no lookup required, which is great. And then we're actually getting our parent ID. So Paul, I think this goes to your question that we need to get, even though we have an article version, we're going to look up to get that parent knowledge article record because that's where the vote gets associated to. And again, we only want the first record because the user can only have one voting record inserted for a specific article. Again, we come back and we check, did we get a vote? So let's do a duplicate vote check. And again, just like we did before, we're doing a double check just to make sure that we have a record returned so that we know if the flow can continue or if it can't continue, what it should do. And again, using descriptive labels to describe those outcomes to make it easier not only to find and look visually in the flow. If you go into your manager, it's going to be much easier, I think, in Contextual to find already voted, and then you can see where that's happening. All right. The other thing I'll make notice is that document as you go. So always utilize your descriptions as you're pulling in these elements. One, you will thank your future self because you will probably forget why you did something or what it might be checking. And you'll enable others to self-service. So if other people or other admins, developers, BAs are looking at your flow, they can understand what you did and why. Next up, let's go into our already voted screen. So if the user has already voted, we want to make sure that they understand that they've already voted, and we want to display what vote they returned. So you'll notice here we've got our screen set up and we're using some display text components. And if I click on here, I've got this weird $ label KB feedback provided heading and a similar label for details. And what this does, it allows me to actually use custom labels in order to provide text for my flow. Custom labels allow you the flexibility to be able to customize your messaging outside of your flow. So if you decide, or a user comes back and says, hey, it's a little unclear in terms of the language, you can update that label and you don't have to worry about anything in your flow. So it gives you a nice flexibility in order to help you manage your text that you display for your users. The other benefit for your users is that if you support multiple languages, custom labels can help you translate into supported Salesforce languages. So then you can automatically manage those translations and you can use the same flow, but give those users who are using a different language, whether it be Spanish or French or other supported languages, they will have that customized experience, further increasing their adoption and making it much easier for them to know what to do next. The next thing I'll note is that we've got these little eye icons. That means we have dependent visibility. And so you'll notice here that I've got the emojis. If you haven't used an emoji in your flow, well, now you know that you can do that. And I did learn that off someone else, but I wanted to share that little tidbit. You can use kind of rich text interface, and emojis work great. The other thing I'll note is that we've got our conditional visibility. So we only want this to come up if we have a positive vote type. And so the vote object itself uses type, and I think it's used in a few different places, like including ideas, and the value entered depends on where you're voting or providing feedback. And so in this case, the vote references either 1 or 5, and it's actually text. And so we want to make sure we control the display depending on whether someone voted up and gave it 5 or voted down and gave it 1. All right, and so depending on your vote returned, then it'll display either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Let's take a step back, and if we decide that no, this person who's running the flow has not voted yet, we go ahead and do an assignment. There's a couple of things we need to do here. We're utilizing that component. In order to populate that component with their text, then we need to actually create some variables to do that. We use text collection variables. And you'll notice now that I have a specific format in terms of the way that I reference my variables. I do that for a couple of reasons. One's because that's how I learned how to use Flow and build out Flow. The second thing I like is that it makes filtering an absolute breeze. And so if you have a lot of variables in your flow, and so you're kind of resembling a London tube map, and you need to find a specific variable that you want to reference, using a prefix to identify those can make your life a lot more pleasurable, because it can get a little bit overwhelming. There is no right or wrong in terms of format. The general rule is adopt something and be consistent. So we've got our 3 values here and our 3 text collection variables, and we need to add some values in here. Now we can add those collection variables in any order in terms of the way they are entered here, but the way that we add each value matters. So order matters here in terms of, for feedback options, if I want yes to be my first choice, then I have to put yes first. If I want no to be my second choice, then I have to put no in order. All right. The next part here is that we've got some feedback choice icons. So the component includes the ability to show icons, like you saw with the thumbs up or thumbs down. And we're actually using the SLDS icons. You can jump over to, I think it's over here. Yep, here it is here. So lightningdesignsystem.com/icons. We're in the utilities section. And so you can reference these icons in your component. So there's a whole bunch of them. You can use what makes sense. You can control them dynamically based on the values that you set. So I encourage you to check that out. So because we want yes to appear first, we want to make sure we have like icon associated with yes and dislike associated with no. Again, order matters. And then we've got the option here to provide a little additional text. So for example, if you had something more complex, or maybe you have users who need some additional instruction, then you can provide some helpful information on screen so they know what the option they're selecting. And again, that order matters, so we make sure we add this article was helpful first, and then our article was not helpful because of the order we'd already set. The other thing we want to do is that we're actually going to utilize a record variable for this record that we're inserting. And so what we need to do is make sure that we set this record variable here into, and I'll show you how you can grab this. So if you go into variable, and then again, I filter because I can do REC, which is the prefix I use for record variables. We're going to use this record variable to insert this custom object record that we saw. And what I want to go ahead and do is grab the reason field. So we set that to null. I noticed when I was doing that, I was getting errors, and so make sure that it's set to null, because in our case, or empty string rather, sorry, that'll be a blank value, because when we have positive feedback, we don't require a reason, and so we need to set a value to make sure that it can insert that record. The other thing we do is jump in and have a current stage. So now we're gathering feedback to update where we are in the process of our flow. With all that set, we can actually now get our feedback. So here is the quick choice component that we grabbed from unofficial SF. I'll let a little turtle swim for a little bit until our screen pops up here. And then you've got some options to customize this. So it has a customizable interface that you can use for your different options, and you can change how things appear, whether it be a pick list, a radio button, different columns, whether you want to show icons or not. And then we reference those choice variables, text variables that we created earlier. So in this, we want our icons, so we're going to use our choice icons. We also have 2 data sources here. So we're using labels and values. So we've got our feedback options, and then we've got our additional details to support those 2 different labels. Okay, and there's a few other things you can do there in terms of setting a default last label that's associated, like we saw in our demonstration. Feedback reason. So you'll notice here we have a feedback reason. So this is why we created a record variable, in order to store those values, so to insert after we have our vote. In order to use this functionality, you need to have a record variable. So we created an empty record variable, and then you can see that we've got 2 pick list fields that we can now reference. And this is actually that field in setup. So if you go into Object Manager, you're going to see that field, and you can add and remove values as you need, and you don't need to change anything on your flow. We're also employing some conditional visibility. So if our feedback choice is no, then we want to make sure that this appears, and you can see that is conditional visibility based on a little CBSI that is showing right there. The other thing we highlighted is that we've actually configured our footer, and we've actually got a custom footer that we are showing, and we've got a custom label instead of finish, so someone knows exactly the context of what's going to happen when they click that button. Let's assign the values that we got from our components. So now we're going to go ahead and set our record variable so that we can go ahead and insert our record. So we set the knowledge article to the record that we found and our version ID. And then we also want to grab here, was this article helpful? And so it allows us to capture the feedback and summarize on our custom record. And so we're taking that option that we got from our component, which is our custom component, and I like to use CMP for that as my prefix, so I know exactly which one I'm referencing. After all that, we get to create our record. So our first create is to insert our article vote. And so you've got the vote option here, and then we have our parent ID. So this is actually getting to that knowledge article. The article gets associated, sorry, the vote rather, gets associated to the article, not the version. And we need a type. And what we're doing here is actually converting that 1 and 5 into text so that we can insert that record, because that type field actually is type text. All right, if things fall over, if something goes wrong, we're going to utilize a kind of newish feature, which instead of having immediately have a screen to show something went wrong, we want to roll back in case it didn't go ahead and we can't go in to provide our feedback. And I call this the vacation element because it allows me to relax and unwind. And I can relax about my data integrity because it's going to roll it back like as in the transaction never happened. My flow didn't run, and I don't have to worry about data integrity now because my my record has been rolled back. We then use a subflow to present to our users, and this is using a utility. The reason for that is because I like to avoid rework, and it allows you to have a standard error screen that you can have variables that you pass into, and you can see here we're passing in the default global variable for the current record, which we set at the start of our flow. We've got the fault message that's coming in. That's really the meat of what's happening, so we understand. I've included a flow name. The reason for that is because you may want to set up workflows in terms of, hey, let's present the user with an error message on screen, but then maybe that sends an email to an administrator or someone else who can help. And so you want to understand, well, where did that email get triggered from? So that can be very useful as well. And then in this instance, we're capturing the flow stage, which we set at the start of our flow here. We also try to insert our article feedback record. And so again, we're referencing that record variable that we created and we assign the values to. So we go ahead and select that and insert that record right there. Finally, we jump over to our vote confirmation. So if you voted, so we're just displaying some output text here, and we've done a little bit of formatting just to make it a little visually appealing, but of course you could customize and style that as you need to. I have this little orphan off tier to the side. I actually use that as a debug screen. I would recommend you do that at times. It can be helpful just to make sure that you have what you expect and you're getting the variables set. So that can be very useful for troubleshooting or just confirming a value or an output that you might need later in your flow. So that is it. That is all I wanted to show in terms of the flow. A couple of other things is that I wanted to highlight here. If I go back to flows, let's quickly take a look at this utility errors screen. And if we wait patiently, So we have a very basic flow, but what we have here is some standardization. So all of our error screens are going to look the same, and we're capturing some additional information. So we talked about getting that flow name. We get the stage if one has been set. It doesn't always get set. We're actually utilizing a formula to strip out the start of the flow name, the API name, so we get a clean stage name. Who's the running user? Which record were they running it on? And then the organization. There is a formula that I unfortunately don't remember the reference to, but you can use a formula in order to get the org. So if you have users running things in sandboxes and you get the error alert, you may not know which org that relates to, you can utilize this formula in order to get that and display that on the screen. And then we have our technical stuff here, which is our flow error message. So that's it in terms of our subflow. So very, very simple there. One thing I didn't show in the demonstration is that we've actually set this up to run in an experience. So if you go ahead and check out the Digital Experiences app, which is new for spring 22, you can go ahead and look at an experience here. Oh, no, that's my CMS. I don't want that. Let's go back to our help screen here. We can actually link to our site. I've actually got it set up right here. So welcome to the U&U community, which is the Up and Under brewery community. We have a very basic setup here, but you'll notice we've got some trending articles here. And let's take a look at some of our articles. Live demos are the best. All right, let's take a little refresh here. All right, let's close this down.
So while you're working on getting that to come up, Andrew just wanted to let you know that he's sending you a virtual high five for having a rugby themed page.
Nice.
And we have Pavel coming back to support you with a hashtag freeform forever. So I agree. I've been trying to learn to like auto layout, but it's really making me angry sometimes.
Yep.
And Pavel is also very impressed by your use of conditional display, the conditional visibility feature.
Well, all the hard work went into the great people who built the component, and so I was just really standing on the shoulders of giants, but I appreciate that feedback. So here we are. So just because I had a stale version, so I had to refresh. So now you can see we've got our feedback and it works exactly the same. So now we can extend that into our knowledge base that is exposed to our external experience users. All right, let's wrap this up. So we know we're running short on time. So we went through a lot in about 40 minutes in terms of 45 minutes in demo. We went through a whole lot: ScreenFlow, Lightning Knowledge, Lightning Record Page that we set up, our custom object and fields, conditional visibility for components. We used the fields beta functionality new in spring 22, and then our base components that we got over from unofficial SF. And I believe you can also now get them from the App Exchange. Some future ideas for enhancements and things that I've been thinking about if you wanted to capture additional feedback. So if you wanted to open a text area to kind of get some additional feedback, or the option like, hey, please contact me about my feedback, and allow them to enter contact details. And I say this with great hesitation. I understand the use of them. You may want to allow users to select multiple reasons for their feedback, but I would strongly encourage you to use a simple process. See, I almost got through that without the anger of multi-select pick lists, almost. And I know people have, it's a very polarizing thing, so take that with a grain of salt, but you could extend it to have a user select multiple reasons why they're providing feedback. Allow users to change their vote. So if you wanted to fit in more with standard functionality, you could add a module to say, hey, you've already voted, but if you want to change it, then you could absolutely do that. And then manage visibility through custom permissions. So for example, you only want specific users within your organization to have access. or kind of as a pilot, then you could maybe use a custom permission, assign it to those users, and then check to see, hey, if they have that permission, then they get visibility, or control it at the record page level as well. And of course, you can't monitor what you can't measure, and so might be the other way around, enhancing some reporting there and kind of that feedback and kind of what's been processed, what feedback you're getting, are articles improving and you're getting less feedback, negative feedback for different articles. So takeaways, we use Flow with some standard and custom elements and integrated that within standard functionality. So the conditional display, of course, we touched on. There's unofficial SF components that we leveraged, and you can make your flows available to internal and external users. So with that, you can raise your hand and we'll open it up to ask questions or comments. In the meantime, while those are coming in, let me say thank you to everyone for attending, your time and participation, and I hope you'll give it 2 thumbs up for my presentation today. Rakesh, Michelle, over to you.
Well, I'm fairly certain your feedback only allows for 1 thumbs up.
Well played.
Okay, so we have some more questions coming in, and I'll do a quick refresh on the Trailblazer community while we handle the ones here in GoToMeeting. So question number 1, Pavel wants to know how you capture user ID from guest users in the community. Or can you, from a guest user that's not authenticated?
They would create the record. For unauthenticated users, no. This is purely for users that are registered and are logging in. So I haven't thought about that use case. The problem is that they could vote multiple times, and so it would distort your feedback. Someone could come in and just kind of click, refresh, click, refresh, click, refresh. And so it is an interesting challenge. I haven't solved how to kind of resolve that for an unauthenticated user. I know some websites have that, and I think even Salesforce has that on some of their areas, but it is not a problem that I have been able to solve just yet.
Gotcha. Okay, so one other question, and if you feel like it, you can jump back into the flow. When you built out some of those pick lists, you said you used a record variable so you could use the fields component. Is there a reason you chose to go that route as opposed to using a pick list choice set?
There's not. To be honest, I just wanted to try out the new functionality. I mean, you could certainly do that. I mean, you have, other flexibility, right? So if we jump back into our flows here and I go over here, yeah, and in an original version of this, I actually had it so that I had a custom pick list. And then I thought, well, the values that I've created and the choices that I've created aren't great. Maybe I can use, do something different. And so, yeah, in terms of this collect feedback screen, you absolutely could use the fields and use a record variable, or you can use this pick list field, which has been updated recently, so you have a little more control over how things display. So for example, you can use multiple choice, you can use the type, so radio button or pick list, and your choices, obviously they've made it much easier to add choices dynamically, but then you could also use a record choice or a field set choice. It used to be very painful using pick lists, and I think some of that was also kind of how far we've come, because there used to be a weird bug where you would have duplicate entries for a pick list, and in order to get around that to display a single and potentially have a default value, you had to do a whole bunch of trickery, like a couple of different lookups to the entity object and there's field values, and then display that within that pick list. So I think this was just, I wanted to discover, how does this functionality work? How useful is it? And then I am a firm believer in try to, those things that you don't have to go back into your flow to change as your kind of requirements change. Try to identify as many of those as you can and set yourself up for success, so you don't have to keep coming in and changing new versions every time someone makes, hey, let's capture a new value, or let's retire one, or let's make some other changes there to those list of values you want to capture.
Awesome. Yep. Nope. And that's a great reason. I just didn't know if there was a reason for one choice over the other.
Nope.
So thank you. We have lots of things coming in, and I know we are at the top of the hour, so I'll do one last call for questions. And yes, Anthony, we really appreciate you coming to present. This was fantastic. As a matter of fact, this is great for a project I'm currently working on, so quite likely I'll be hijacking some of this. So
Nice.
definitely we appreciate you coming to present it and sharing your brilliance with the rest of the community.
Of course, pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to get back.
All right. Well, thanks all. I hope you have a good day, evening, night, whenever you happen to watch the recording. And we'll see you on the next Automation Hour.